was one of those unique moments in time where the right group of people showed up with a similar idea and said, let's take a chance, let's see if it can work, and all supported each other to make it happen.
The reason that we all got together originally was because we thought about housing as being a fundamental challenge that was facing New Jersey. And so there was over 1 million people in New Jersey who were either paying too much or had low quality or didn't have any housing at all. We had started the New Jersey Community Loan Fund, looking at those organizations that were starting to pop up, trying to do development work. And we wanted to create more financing opportunities there. And that became kind of successful enough right after year 2 that we thought that maybe we could come together across the state and take it to a level where there's another building block being put in place. So the loan fund was doing the financial and technical help, and then there was this other problem that we were then confronting, and that was that all the nonprofits were kind of focused on their own local stuff. The local towns weren't quite sure how to interact with these growing number of organizations, and there was less federal control over housing and more state control starting to come into play. And so it made sense for us to think about creating a statewide organization that could bring people together, help them learn, as well as help them achieve their goals by thinking about the policies, both public and private, that would be needed. Let's start acting more powerfully. We can be smarter, we can be connected, we can be able to deal with policy issues at the state level. We can, by coming together, we would have collective credibility that we didn't have individually.
While being the executive director of the National Housing Institute, I was also involved with supporting the implementation of the Community Reinvestment Act to make sure banks were serving all members of the community in their service area. CRA also provided an opportunity for community groups when banks merged with other banks to challenge the merger and negotiate for additional community resources, and in many cases, the creation of advisory boards to support their new goals. In one case, in working with Citibank Mortgage, our contact, Nancy Greenspan, became interested in looking at statewide local CDCs and ways to support them. Richard Brown, who I first met in Vista training in 1972 and was now working as the head of the NHS of Jersey City, together we worked on a proposal to submit to Nancy to fund research on CDCs in New Jersey and support some regional meetings to see if there was interest in starting a statewide organization. Citibank agreed to fund our proposal and provided a grant to the National Housing Institute. 3 regional meetings occurred in 1987 in Paterson, Trenton, and Camden. We had great attendance with over 100 supporters of CDC attending in total.
There was a lot of energy coming out of those regional meetings. One of the questions asked at the time, I think, was, do you guys want to formalize something more?
We also worked on a survey to gather information from those in the CDC field. With some of the funds, we hired Diane Sterner to help write up the results of the survey and the regional meetings.
Diane was the consultant for Donald Jackson Neighborhood Corporation when I was hired in 1989. And so I came from campus ministry to housing. And one of the things working in Newark and in northern New Jersey around campus ministry, couldn't deny the need for housing and the need for a stronger community. So I think that's where that genesis came, and then got together with Diane during the interview process for DJNC. I remember talking with Woody and going, boy, I gotta get in on this. This is something that we really need to make happen, because I needed it. And I think our community needed it. So that's the first impression, and just coming together and going, wow, this is something that's bigger than me. And this is something that can affect lives and affect the environment, not just in terms of the community, but in terms of a strategy for how we get from here to there.
The survey I did in the interviews, there were about 60 organizations that we found in New Jersey that were nonprofit housing developers. They didn't all join initially. Maybe there were probably 20 or something.
The initial bylaws required some geographic balance around the state.
The survey work that Diane did and Rick helped with made a difference in that because we knew who they were and they knew who we were, and it changed it because at that point, if you were working in North Jersey, you didn't know about anybody in South Jersey necessarily because there was no way to connect. And this way we had a chance to come and meet, whether it was at St. Michael's or other places, and actually get to know each other and find what we had in common and what the same issues were.
At the end of 1987, a meeting was held in Orange, New Jersey, in the building where the National Housing Institute was housed to present the findings of our work and propose the creation at that time of the Affordable Housing Network of New Jersey. In '88, a steering committee was set up about hiring an executive director. There were 5 of us on the committee. It was a much longer and harder process. A new executive director was hired ultimately just before the conference.
As we were trying to figure out whether and how to get started with developing the association, we had a conference down in Long Branch, and we had a really good attendance at that. That's probably when maybe 100 people came together. We used it as a sort of informational thing for people, but also explored the idea of forming the association, and there was a lot of interest. So we pulled out of that a working group to help get the organization started. A lot of the people that were part of that working group ultimately became board members of the network.
We were sensitive about the challenge of creating an entity that might actually compete with those we intend to serve. So what we tried to do was create a level of direct accountability by having members of organizations controlling the board, but also having some outside folks participating as well, who were not just representing their local organizations.
I think it's really important to always keep the core membership of the network in mind as the guiding force for what the decisions are about what the network takes on. We did a blueprint for affordable housing in New Jersey a number of times, I think, to flesh out what some of the challenges were and what the resulting policies needed to be to make life easier for nonprofit housing developers and community development groups in New Jersey.
Put us in a position of being more proactive and not just reactive.
We had lots of meetings with people from DCA and HMFA. And for those meetings, the people that were concerned about those particular advocacy issues would join for the meetings. And we would usually do like some materials with showing what the network's point of view was and what we were trying to accomplish. And then everyone would join for the meeting and help make the case for the policies that needed to change.
Now that I work for Catholic Charities USA and I work with all of our 167 agencies across the country doing this work, I can tell you a big lesson from Housing and Community Development Network in New Jersey is the power of convening. I just don't think that can be understated of bringing people together.
One of the early wins with the policy was getting the New Jersey Rehab Code legislation. We worked with the DCA to develop a bill to require the state to develop its own rehab code. And then we worked with the state to actually develop that rehab code, which later was used as a model for many other states. I think one of the signature accomplishments of the network over time was the passage of the Abandoned Property Rehabilitation Act, which gave new tools to municipalities and to nonprofit groups to reclaim abandoned properties, which were often sitting right in the middle of something positive that a CDC was trying to do. So getting that to happen and then helping people at the local level figure out how to use the law was part of our work, and that was made easier by having these local associations.
The Abandoned Properties Rehabilitation Act was a piece of landmark legislation. It created the strongest municipal powers in the nation for dealing with vacant and deteriorated properties.
A lot of our successes came out of partnerships that we developed with other organizations to accomplish bigger goals than we would have been able to accomplish on our own. Like we partnered with the Bankers Association on a mentoring program with CDC's Wells Fargo Regional Foundation, did an endowment to use for community building. And we started a program around, I think it was called the Community Building Support Initiative, where we raised a pool of money to try to reintroduce community organizing to nonprofit development organizations and community-based developers. We had people come speak who had been involved for years, especially on the community organizing side, and then we funded it. So we were able to fund maybe 8 organizations to hire community organizers and integrate that with their work. And that ended up resulting in the legislation that we got passed some years later, but it was the Neighborhood Revitalization Tax Credit, which to this day funds community organizations to neighborhood plans with significant resident and stakeholder input, but it led to legislation which actually funds this kind of work. Now it's $15 million a year. Another early achievement, I would say, was we worked with Joe McNeely on a capacity building paper. We dived into the issues of what nonprofit housing groups and CDCs needed to be as effective as they could be in terms of technical assistance and training and probably funding support as well. So he worked with us on that paper, and we ultimately used that to start the network's technical assistance and training program, which we hired Martha Lamar to run. She helped ultimately work with DTI, where Joe McNeely worked, to start the housing development training program that we ran for a number of years very successfully. We did occasional sort of one-shot seminars when there was a special issue that people needed to know more about quickly.
One of the things that really helped us in South Jersey, the Diocese of Camden, was connecting us to more resources and information that we could probably have done alone by ourselves.
The ability to get a theoretical base as well as the tools to have conversations locally and stand up for our rights with the city was an amazing accomplishment. I think maybe those are the most important things that I would say. I think both Women Rising and Fairmount Housing gained enormous value out of my participation in the network, because I could bring back all this information and I could bring questions to the board, and it was a really terrific two-way street for a long time.
It became clear to us that not all the solutions paving the way for CDC's work was through state legislation or state policy advocacy or even training, but that a lot of local policies stood in the way of some organizations being able to do their job. So we helped to form the Newark Community Development Network, Camden Community Development Association, and we helped start that. And there was one in Trenton for a while, and there was one in Jersey City. We tried to start them up in places where there was a concentration of nonprofit housing developers and CDCs so that they could do the same thing we were doing at the state level with getting their cities to implement better policies, use their CDBG and home money in ways that were more supportive for their work.
It just led to even some informal and informal collaborations with other agencies and information sharing and just advice on developing, and it led to stronger relationships, I think, internally amongst the members of the network. And ultimately, I think probably the biggest piece for us in South Jersey and me at the Diocese of Camden was the advocacy and policy guidance that the network was able to bring along with that technical assistance that was just really valuable.
The context that was set allowed organizations like LIST to grow because there was a level of trust that was created by the network that allowed for collaboration, communication, and particularly with the funders that are around the LIST table to engage with and trust the CDCs that are working on this vital work.
Early on, we wanted to have the network be the Housing and Community Development Network, and we decided against that. At the time, some of us thought that there were limits to housing, which is why we expanded it over time. But initially, we thought we had to stay focused. We had to keep that discipline around the housing issue. And then we talked about, over time, we would be expanding the focus of the organization. And I think that was, in retrospect, probably the right thing to do. But a lot of people knew about us just from the housing issue over time.
A lot of the groups, as time went on, were doing more than housing. And some of the groups that we wanted to encourage to join the network, they were doing more broader community development or economic development. It probably went on for months, the debate about whether to change the name. A lot of the housing groups felt that we might lose the focus on housing. And it was really important to them that focus remain and be front and center of what the network would do. People became more comfortable with it. It only added value. And we were able to do special things then, like job creation and economic development projects, which wouldn't have made any sense if we hadn't changed the name. So it opened up the door to create some more integrated strategies for communities.
To me, I think what's important to remember is that back in those early days when Woody and I were talking and we pulled some other people together and we got Diane and Rick to start doing the surveys and the outreach. I think we all believed it was important. In those early days, it wasn't certain that it would succeed. And I look back at it and it did not only succeed, but it succeeded far better than any of us ever imagined. It has become something that is an integral part of the process in New Jersey, whether you're a nonprofit group, whether you're a funder, or you're a state legislator, anybody. The network has changed the environment and changed the world and made it a place where we can all support each other and work in the magnitude of the number of housing units that's been created, the community development organizations, the jobs, all of these things. It's so much more than anything we ever anticipated. And I think we need to look back at that and say, sometimes we have to dream big, and we did dream big at that point, and we succeeded far better than we dreamed.